Hello and welcome to the Kim Iverson Show. Thank you so much for joining us. We do have a new time. You might have noticed that this show is now moved way up to 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. We were at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. For those of you who had not seen this show before, and it just seems like I popped out of nowhere because you normally are looking for things at this time, and I wasn't here before. Well, that's because I was way later. But now we're earlier. And so we are thrilled to have you watching the show and hope that you continue to join us. We are Monday through Friday, 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. All right. Tonight is a young journalist named Rav Arora, who, after having a skyrocketing journalism career being published in a number of outlets, he was then essentially muzzled when he started writing about the COVID vaccines and the science showing myocarditis. Now, he was writing about it back when it was called a conspiracy theory, before it became accepted fact. And you might have even seen him from his interview with Jordan Peterson on his podcast. He's been mentioned by Joe Rogan. He also had a very public spat with Mark Cuban over Mark's ultra pro-vaccine stance. He now hosts a podcast called The Illusion of Consensus alongside Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, who was one of the doctors behind the Great Barrington Declaration. Rav is incredibly well-researched. He's very young. He's in his early 20s. He's just incredibly brilliant and does really great work. And he's been very brave all throughout the COVID pandemic. And even now, as he exposes more corruption and just collusion and all kinds of things he's been uncovering now that he's been kind of forced into being an independent journalist. So I really look forward to my conversation tonight with Rav. But first, let's get to tonight's sponsors. Now, let me guess, your medicine cabinet is crammed with stuff that doesn't work. You still aren't sleeping. That's my biggest problem, is sleep issues. Maybe you still hurt. You're aching after your workouts, or maybe you're just stressed out. I know for me, that's how it was. It was nothing I was doing was really working. So I cleared out my cabinet. I reset my health with CBD from CB Distillery, and it's been a real change. CB Distillery's targeted formulations are made from the highest quality, clean ingredients. There's no fluff, there's no fillers. It's just pure, effective CBD solutions designed to help support your health, so whatever the issue is. Now, in two non-clinical surveys, 81% of customers experienced more calm. 80% said CBD helped them with pain after physical activity. And an impressive 90% said they slept better with CBD. So if you struggle with a health concern and you haven't found relief, then make the change like I did to CB Distillery. And with over 2 million customers and a solid 100% money-back guarantee, CB Distillery is the source to trust. Now, I have a 20% discount to get you started. Just visit cbdistillery.com and use the code KIM. That's you'll get 20% off with that. That's cbdistillery.com and use that code KIM. Now, stress may also cause you to not lose weight. You're still packing on the pounds. It's probably because you're stressed out. Could be one of the reasons. Well, if you have moderate to high stress, then a doctor-formulated weight loss supplement called Lean could be your solution. Chronic stress wreaks havoc on blood sugar, which can cause your body to store excess fat. Stress can also slow your metabolism, which fuels weight gain, and you know all about stress eating and sugar cravings. Now there's good news. The studied ingredients in Lean have been shown to help maintain healthy blood sugar levels. They help optimize metabolism and keep your appetite under control. So if your life is a bit stressful and you want to lose some weight, then add Lean to your healthy diet and exercise lifestyle. Now get 15% off and free shipping at takelean.com and enter the promo code KIM15. That's KIM15 at takelean.com. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease and is not a substitute or alternative for care from a healthcare provider. All right, guys, let's get to tonight's show. Very excited for this guest to have this conversation. Rav Arora, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Hey, Kim. Great to be here.
So let's, I haven't talked to you in a bit. You've been covering a lot of stuff on your site, your Substack, The Illusion of Consensus. You have a podcast now with Dr. Jay Bhattacharya. First of all, how's that going? How's the podcast going? I love Dr. Jay Bhattacharya. He's great.
Yeah. It was such a kind of spontaneous idea we had last March. And I think I was on your show last year, August or September, I think. So we talked about it then. But it's been great since. We've developed a growing audience, a lot of people that support us and are interested in our work. And really at the start, and now there's interesting things in the news right now, but it really started as a COVID kind of project, but it's branched out a lot into free speech, totalitarianism, censorship, and increasingly for me, interest in big pharma, mental health, and just the way in which our society functions in terms of medication, vaccination, like recommending different things to deal with very complex health issues. It's There's a lot going on in my personal life as well that kind of tracks with my journalistic interests, where I'm realizing that a lot of the areas which we trust establishment organizations and authorities and companies, media outlets, doctors, physicians, a lot of that is in some ways negative or harmful, or in some cases just quite dangerous. The kind of mainstream establishment advice we get on many things, ranging from vaccines to mental health to SSRIs, ADHD medications, the way we understand mental health, and the failure to recognize the mind body connection. There's a bunch of things that I've been tracking, and it started with COVID. I mean, it really started a couple years ago, 2020. It's been 4 years now, I guess, 3.5 years.
Yeah.
When I was writing about Black Lives Matter and race issues and policing and criminal justice to some of the trans issues. It's And then COVID, and then since then, more and more realizing that it's not just COVID vaccines, it's not just the mRNAs, it's not just a handful of topics. That there's a whole host of areas, and some of them are quite, personal for me. A lot of it is mental and psychological, like I was alluding to, the way we deal with mental illness. The more and more I look, the more and more I realize that COVID pandemic was just the unraveling of so much institutional corruption and rot and perverse incentives that are running or wreaking havoc everywhere. And COVID has provided us an outlet to start to look, but there's a lot more. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't have time to go deep into these areas. But people like myself and Jay Bhattacharya and people like yourself, who I greatly credit for the great work you're doing, Kim. Big fan of the show. It's like people like you are heroes, right? You guys are doing such great work and helping people understand what's really going on when they have kids and jobs to do, and things to work in their life. They don't have exactly 10 hours to spend on looking at SSRIs or anxiety medications or different therapies. That they have very limited amount of time, so it's our job.
Yeah. Well, it's sometimes thankless as we get smeared and censored. And I want to talk about that. Before you got into COVID, you're a very young writer. You're at the very beginning of your career.
42
Um,
years old.
you're sorry. What did you just say?
42 years old.
42 years old. Okay. Right.
Journalism degree from Columbia University. Journalism degree. Got all the establishment credit over here.
Oh, I see. Okay. All right. You just added like 20 years to your age and
Yeah.
and a bunch of and you haven't been able to leave Canada. So I have a hard time believing that you were able to like get in to Columbia and get a degree from there when you couldn't even cross the border because of Justin Trudeau and
Yeah.
his draconian
Yeah.
measures that you guys were under up there. Um,
Yeah.
just insane. So
Yeah.
let's kind of back up a little bit just to kind of so that the audience kind of gets a feel for who you are before we get into some of the work that you've recently done on MDMAs and government being paid, MSM being paid for COVID vaccines, and there's a bunch of stuff that you've been uncovering. So when you started off, now I remember you were writing for like the New York Post, you were writing for a bunch of these different outlets, and I think they liked you because you're a person of color, but you were talking
Yeah.
against the narrative of racism is the end all be, we were all held back because of racism, right? That was the narrative for a while there. And you were saying that's not true. I don't agree with any of this. So you were kind of brought into the fold, I would say, of probably a lot of right wing journalistic
Yeah. Yeah.
outlets.
Yeah.
Would you say?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
how did that start? Like, what were you talking about, and what were they
Yeah.
like? Who were you writing for before COVID hit?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess you and I were not talking back then. Were you at the Hill at that time, or was that after? This is 2020.
No, I wasn't. I didn't join the Hill until, 2020. I was with the Hill until 2021, or no, 20. No, I was there with 2021 to 2022. So 1 year.
Okay.
Yeah, it
What
was
were you doing in
after.
2020? Did you have a show?
Yeah, and it was heavily censored.
Yeah.
I was on YouTube. I was just doing my YouTube show, and I was getting demonetized, and videos were being removed. All of 2020, I was talking about COVID quite a bit, talking about lab leak theory that was heavily censored. I had a video that I did like March 27th of 2020 about potential lab leak, and they ripped that off the web, put a strike on my channel. They wouldn't allow me to grow subscribers at all for a really long time. So I
Mm,
was just really heavily censored, and just really,
yeah.
and I was, at that time for me, I was really, I was shocked I assumed that all the people in my world of politics, because I was more of a progressive leftist talker, I assumed that the people in my world would agree with me on the things I was saying. I was saying a lockdown is a bad idea. The middle class is going to get crushed.
Mm,
Vaccine mandates are a bad idea. This is antithetical to freedom. And I was surprised at how many of them disagreed with me and were all in on all of the measures. And I just was like, I found myself very alone. You probably have a similar experience that we're going to get to here, but I suddenly found myself, the group that embraced me prior to that point, who I was one of them, suddenly I wasn't. Suddenly I was a crazy libertarian right winger, according to a bunch of them, because I took the stance that was more of the libertarian stance. I thought Sweden had the best approach to the pandemic. I was all about that, and my counterparts were very much not, and I was very shocked by that. So I got kind of ostracized and felt homeless, totally homeless. Politically. And I think you probably had a very similar experience for COVID because you were embraced. Strangely, though, because you were coming from more of the right wing, like we were coming from opposite sides. So
uh-huh.
you were on the right talking about racism and how that's just all a bunch of, which I agreed with you during that time too. I was one of those people that was like, no, not no. I don't think racism is
Right.
like, I don't walk outside as an Asian woman and think, oh, I'm going to be, this is like the thing
Yeah.
I think about when I go outside my house.
Right. Stop Asian hate.
Yeah, I mean, it's like not the top thought in my brain when I go
Right.
out in the
Right.
world. So tell us kind of where you were before the pandemic
Yeah.
hit, what group kind of embraced you, what you were talking about, and then we'll get into your experience with COVID, because I think you were also ostracized.
Yeah. 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 So George Floyd happened, which I don't know if I'm ready to talk about all of it now. There's been more and more information coming out on that particular story that I want to dig
Right.
into more and more. Coleman Hughes has a great piece in the Free Press I got to read, and there's a new documentary. Glenn Lowry, John McWhorter, the black guys on Substack, the contrarian black guys, as they say, they've been talking about it, and I'm starting to become more and more convinced now, actually, that even that case was not exactly what we thought it was at the time, even by myself, because the kind of default approach by a lot of centrists and sensible-minded people was that this is an aberration, this is completely wrong and unjustified, and maybe it is racism, but this is obvious, indisputable evidence of police brutality. But the criminal justice system, for all of its flaws, there's not clear evidence, particularly for police shootings, being driven by racial animus towards Black Americans. Like when you look at the data, you see so many white Americans shot by the police that never make it in the news, like people like Tony Timpa, Daniel Shaver, many other individuals who were brutalized by police officers, but it just never made the news. So you end up having people my age, and obviously people your age and across the spectrum, who hear, oh, black guy shot by the police, and it's like Black Lives Matters everywhere, and diversity training, and white privilege, all this stuff, and it's like that's how this indoctrination happens. Is like one thing after another. It gets woven into the cultural psyche. It becomes like a religious thing for many people. There's Black Lives Matter marches happening, and it's like the echo chamber is systemic racism is everywhere. The police are out there hunting down black men, trying to kill them. That's what LeBron James said. So you have a lot of fear and anxiety around this issue, a lot of paranoia, a lot of cultural paranoia, and kind of collective psychosis on this kind of view of criminal justice and race in the country. And then you see all these other people, over time. You see, not, it's not just, black people are oppressed, but then it's like all these other people. It's like, hey, like, you were pretty sure like your dad was like a software engineer and like your mom was a lawyer, and you guys came from Pakistan, but like, your parents are making six figures, and like you're buying into this and saying like, yeah, fuck white people, like this is part of the white patriarchy, and I'm a victim of racism. It's like, pretty sure you're living a pretty privileged life. So I was kind of going against that, not in the sense of racism doesn't exist or never existed, because this one piece I think you're alluding to, that was kind of my breakout piece in the New York Post, The Fallacies of White Privilege. That was all about how I had experienced a lot of racism growing up in a white majority school, and that was kind of a traumatic part of childhood, and was very difficult. But over time, we made a lot of progress, and for some reason on the left, there's just an inability to recognize the tremendous progress, and kind of understand it's actually the reverse now. Like if you're in corporate America or at elite universities, if you're black and or Hispanic and or gay or trans or whatever, and you're qualified, you have all the credentials, you're given a leg up, right? People desperately want more qualified black people and gay people. Like they want, and some of that is arguably just kind of the cynical progressivism of like, we want to look like we're all about diversity and we care about people, yet we're cutting corners here and here, and we're not actually functioning like an ethical organization. So that there's that as well. So I was pointing that out at that time, I think in a very poignant and genuine way, which really struck a chord among many people from like Sam Harris to Ben Shapiro, many people reading my stuff and supporting what I was doing, and I was excited about it. And from there, I just kept on writing more and more, particularly about police shootings and Black Lives Matter, and I guess starting to see for the first time
breaking down the data and say this is the truth of it. Because when you look at the actual shooting data, a lot of the data just doesn't go with the narrative. The narrative is there. They're pushing a certain narrative. But when you actually start digging in, and this is kind of time and time again, almost for every topic, right? The minute you start digging into the actual data, it's like, well, but the data isn't really supporting this particular narrative, right? So I just want to kind of back up for just a second, because you are living in Canada, you're a Canadian, and you live in a liberal city, right? Did you grow up there in Vancouver? Are you from there? Are you from somewhere else?
Yeah, actually, I'm a couple hours away from Vancouver. I just say Vancouver because that's what people know. But I live in a small town called Chilliwack that no one's ever heard of, including half of Canada. It's actually a very conservative town, actually. A lot of Dutch immigrants, a lot of evangelical Christians. A lot of my great friends happen to be more on that side of things religiously. But it's interesting though, because still, like, even in a very conservative city, and maybe this has definitely changed, I would say, radically the last 4 or 5 years. But even here in a conservative town, like, the local school district is absolutely fucking captured by this crazy woke ideology in ways that I can't. Some things I can't even share. But like former teachers that I had who were like very centrist and like showing both sides of the perspective on, say, Black Lives Matter or like gay marriage, abortion. Like one of my teachers who was doing that, showing both sides and really giving a fair shake to the conservative and liberal perspectives. Now suddenly, being forced to have trigger warnings or have a counselor in the room to deal with students, and up until the point of like he can't even teach there anymore, and he was laid off because of student complaints that he was defending Trump just because he was doing pros and cons about Trump.
Oh,
and
gosh.
like a bunch of stuff. So it's like, yeah, you live even in very conservative places. It's, for some reason, you get into education, elementary, middle, high school. Like my sister was telling me the other day, first day back from winter break, and the big thing everyone's talking about is how the boys' bathrooms now have tampons, and like everyone's talking about it, and people are leaving to go. All the boys are going to the bathroom now. And, I mean, honestly, sounds like a great time, having fun and just figuring out what's going on. But it's like that level of insanity is just like, really, it's not just like an issue that I'm writing about in terms of, it's not just the United States. It's not just New York or Portland, Oregon, or Seattle or LA. It's everywhere, really.
Right.
It's really hard to exaggerate the problem.
No, I mean, I'm from Boise, Idaho, and my family there is saying that they're experiencing that in the schools, that the schools in the ultra-red conservative state of Idaho is still having this sort of problem. But I was gonna when I was young growing up, I was one of the I also grew up in a very white area. I was one of only a handful of kids in the school that were not white, and I'm half white, but it was very very white. All the kids are blonde, blue eyed. I mean, that's how white they are. But I had a very different. I wasn't made fun of at all. I mean, I would say that the kids of color in my school were almost made popular because we were different. I mean, I was a cheerleader at one point for my freshman year of high school, and the squad was three of us were, my one of my best friends. She's the only black girl in school. Was one of the cheerleaders, myself, and then another girl who was Japanese, and then the other three were white. Maybe one of them might be some sort of ethnic heritage. I don't know. She doesn't look totally white, I guess, but that wasn't, that was like a popularity contest. And, it wasn't like, oh, we want to be diversive and include, back then, I mean, they didn't care. This was many years ago. They didn't care about that kind of stuff. It was, but the kids around us thought we were kind of unique and cool because we were different. And they would ask us a lot of questions about what it was like. I'd get that question. How does it feel? I'm like, it tingles, totally tingles. I don't know.
Yeah. You feel supercharged. Like you're like in a different costume, a different reality for us. I mean, but it's
interesting that you grew up also in a conservative area and had a little bit of a different experience with that than I did as a kid growing up in an ultra conservative, and many years apart. I mean, you and I have quite an age difference, so maybe things have gotten worse.
Come on, a couple of years.
Oh yeah, a couple of years. I wish. So you were writing all of these things and being embraced by like the Ben Shapiros of the world. COVID hits, and you're writing, and you're in all of these different, and you're young, and you're doing all of this. I mean, you're doing quite well at that age. And at that point, what were you, like 19, 20 years old when you were writing about racism?
Yeah, 19. Yeah, 19, first op-ed. Yeah. That was so weird how that happened. Yeah, it was because of that piece that this career kind of got rocket launched. It was never, like, journalism was never even like a thought, like grade 10, 11, 12, and even after 2 years after high school or 1 year after, it was never even a thought. It just kind of some sort of weird spiritual thing. Which
what did you want to be?
Getting more. I really wanted to go to Harvard or Columbia or an elite Ivy League university. That was one of my big dreams in high school, but I didn't have the grades for it, and I just kind of fell apart after high school. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I mean, I had some ideas, like maybe like film and acting, potentially stand-up comedy, things that I still want to do, by the way. So if you see me winning the Oscars in a few years, that's first edit on the Kim Iverson show.
Yeah.
No, like I'm very much more on the sort of high creativity kind of artsy side of things.
Okay.
Always used to get the awards for like top artist. So at a certain point, I was like the best painter and drawer, sketch artist. And then in middle school, I was like the big theater kid. So I was always, the one cracking the jokes and just saying outrageous things and like performing in front of people. Like that was a big thing. So I was really kind of all over the place. Like I was really good at math, but really bad at science, really bad at biology, but at a certain point, better at physics. Like there's all these, like I was kind of all over the place. And that's, kind of how the creative mind works. The high ADD mind, it's like you have all these sprawling different interests. And for a while, there was a lot of anxiety that I had early on. And some of this is just immigrant parenting of like, figure your shit out right now. Like, what's your 5-year plan? What are you going to do? Which college? What discipline? And I'm like, I kind of like a lot of different things. And I don't know, if I'm going to fit a particular box. And I remember being so worried at a certain point, like grade 7, grade 8, and then grade 12. I'm like, what am I going to do? Like, I don't know where I fit in. Like, I feel like I'm going to be one of those losers who just never got anywhere after high school because all my friends had, more of a established thing. Like, okay, we're going to go study the sciences. A lot of my friends, doctors, lawyers, engineers, my closest friends were in those areas. But I guess just with Black Lives Matter, identity politics, and just something cosmic happened there, which maybe I'll one day be able to articulate better. And for those of you who don't know, I'm studying mysticism, Eastern spirituality, meditative, contemplative traditions in my university program. Just as like it's not really a program. I'm just kind of working one-on-one with a couple of very good professors. So that's like the other world that I operate in, is I'm reading like ancient Hindu and Buddhist scriptures and
Hmm.
figuring out what kind of experiences they were having and what self transcendence and dissolving the ego means. Like those are my other interests. Anyway,
So then COVID hits, and you try to publish some more. So then you're also still you're doing what you always did, which is diving into the data, and you're looking at the data, and you're like, this isn't. Things are not as they're saying. Things are not as they seem. And you start trying to write pieces about COVID and what happened at that point. This is where things kind of go awry.
yeah,
Even with right wing outlets, this is what is really interesting about this, because people think, oh, the right wing, they're all about free speech. They're all about learning the truth and eyes opening. But you were in the right. You were like on the right side of, journalism with right wing outlets, and they still censored you. They still would not publish you.
yeah. And I've abstained from naming people or naming the places
Name
because that
names.
would
Come
just
on. Drop names.
oh,
Let's do it. Let's get them.
New York Times, Washington
Oh,
Post.
those aren't right wing
Yeah.
outlets. That's to be expected.
Yeah, no, I was writing for a few different places, and Globe and Mail, all the way from left wing like Globe and Mail, the Grammys, to more right wing places as well. And basically, in a nutshell, the response I was getting, not just from one editor or from one publication, but many different publications, some of which were even more, I wouldn't even say right wing, but like alternative, sort of in the contrarian space. And the response was like, no, like yeah, we're against wokeism, we're against radical transgender ideology, but this is the science. COVID vaccines are safe and effective. The risks are lower than the benefits. It makes sense for virtually everyone, and we don't want to promote any vaccine hesitancy or any conspiracy theory on our
Mm.
platform, right? We're just because we're conservative doesn't mean we're going to entertain every conspiracy theory, right? We're not going to go full Alex Jones. That's kind of the response I was getting. And for me, it was like just such a shock because some of these places I had openly written about many controversial topics like Black Lives Matter, identity politics, the transgender issue a little bit, just a bit of the gender wage gap stuff. Um, but this was like a third rail. I mean, I thought Black Lives Matter was a third rail, right? Because I mean, it depends where you go. In certain areas, that is a third rail, but it proved to be actually not as bad as COVID. COVID proved to be a far more dangerous topic, which kind of surprised me, given the fact that historically the left was anti-big pharma and more skeptical of authority decrees and these kind of public government efforts at propaganda and
Yeah.
convincing people based on scant evidence about various measures, like all this like level of corruption. But I was not able to publish even like stories of vaccine injuries that I was hearing about locally, and I think that's what really red pilled me on COVID. Like I remember at the start of the pandemic, that's like BLM happened that summer. Even at that point, I had zero interest in COVID. And it's funny, my little brother who's 18, he was reading up on data, following Alex Jones. I don't know if I should be just shaming him publicly or my brother. But,
Yeah, right.
he was
He
like, my brother
totally
was like,
watches lots of Alex Jones. He consumes
yeah,
them regularly.
yeah. Now I'm gonna have to put him on the payroll for the next 40 years.
Yeah.
Is going to be written off by everybody. No, but he was big into the Infowars stuff, and he was reading stuff, and he was like, "Oh no, the death numbers are not what they really are." And I remember I was like, "This is such bullshit, man! Like, what the fuck's wrong with you? Like, just shut
Yeah.
up, just whatever." And I had some friends who were more on the conservative side who were very skeptical about this whole lockdown thing about masks. But for me, the breaking point, the big revelation was the vaccine injuries when I was hearing so many cases about it, and it was like, whoa. So, either I'm just in some weird place where it's a statistical anomaly, like I'm just hearing about vaccine injuries and no one else is, which is
Hmm.
possible, or this is a real fucking problem. And the more I looked into the data, talking to Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, Dr. Tracy Beth Hogue, some people that I consulted early on, they were like, yeah, this is a real issue. And yeah, the CDC is gaslighting you and the FDA is wrong. And I was like, oh, that's fucked up. I
Yeah.
should write about that. And so trying to write about that proved to be impossible in many cases. And that, again, was really frustrating because that was really the opposite of what I thought journalism was supposed to be about, So that led to the migration on Substack. And at that point, I guess, given my demographic as well, like young male, younger, healthier person, I was interested in the myocarditis issue, and very few people were writing about it. I mean, there were like Alex Berenson. Like, I don't know if I can name anyone else other than Alex Berenson who was like writing about just COVID issues in general and being skeptical about them without going full on like anti-vax.
Hmm.
So I would say I really occupied and, I guess was successful as a result of filling this niche of just the myocarditis issue. There was so much to write about. So Alex can't write about every fucking paper on infection fatality rate and hydroxychloroquine and vaccines and elderly groups and side effects and menstrual issues and autoimmune.
Right.
Like, there's so many different issues with vaccination. I kind of filled this niche of focusing on myocarditis, and that's kind of, I think, what led to some of the bigger pieces and some of the viral hits, and Joe Rogan reading stuff, and getting into debates with Mark Cuban. That's kind of how
Yeah,
all that
let's talk
started.
about that. The Mark Cuban debate. What happened? What happened with
Sure.
Mark? Mark is he still to this day ultra pro get the vaccine? I'm always shocked by people who today are still that way. I'm like, really? I mean, okay. So but I think he is. What happened? How did you get into this debate
Yeah,
with him?
yeah. I'm not perfectly sure, and I've talked about this before. I'm not sure what I can or can't say exactly, but
You can
um,
say
they,
everything.
they,
I think you should be dropping names of the outlets that wouldn't publish you that said, "Oh, we don't want to promote these kinds of conspiracies." You should shame
yeah,
them. And then whatever, you should publish everything that you had in the debate with Mark Cuban. Shame him.
yeah. Yeah, yeah. Well, unfortunately, I can't. But I did consult with some people on my side about like releasing things privately, and
Oh,
it
because
turned out to be not a good career
it was
move.
a private
Yeah,
exchange.
yeah,
Is that what the issue was? Oh, okay.
yeah. No, but it poured out to the public though, because I mean, I was kind of afraid to talk about it because it was a private thing, and basically, Mark Cuban was attacking Joe Rogan, and let's just say, I guess Joe Rogan arranged for me to debate him privately over email, basically. And we went back and forth over and over again, particularly about myocarditis, but ethics of vaccine mandates. And he just like going back and forth with him, it was just proving how much of a complete moron he was on this issue. Like he was so fucking stupid, Kim. Like it's just you're going back and forth with him. And he's like, no, well, the CDC says this, the FDA says this. Like all his priors were like FDA, CDC, Fauci, and like citing like studies that were deliberately misleading or deceptive in many cases when it came to studies on myocarditis, and he just didn't know what he was talking about. Honestly, I felt like he really was occupying this kind of wealthy billionaire Democrat New York Times reading class where the CDC and the FDA are gospel. Fauci is your ordained minister.
Right.
Joe Rogan is the devil. Independent media is all conspiracy quacks, and he has access to the truth, and everyone else is wrong. That's kind of what I collided with in real time, and that poured over. Weirdly enough, last August, like this is like early, yeah, January 2022 is when this private interaction with Mark happened, and then August 2023, Patrick Bet-David was on Joe Rogan's show, and he asked him about Mark Cuban because Mark has been very critical of Joe, as I said. And then Joe was like, "Yeah, I don't think he knows what he's talking about." And then he actually mentioned, some things that I wasn't even ready to. I wasn't sure if it's ethical to say these things in public, but he was like, "Yeah, I've seen his exchanges with Rav Arora and how he doesn't know what he's saying, like on myocarditis, on vaccine mandates. He's just not informed on those issues. He hasn't done the requisite research." And then, everyone's messaging me, "Oh, Joe Rogan messaged you. Oh my God, And I'm like,
Right.
"Oh wow, yeah, it was crazy." Yeah, I was like, "Wow,
So
Jesus
was he
Christ."
in on the email
Uh,
chain or something? Did he like introduce the two
yeah,
of you via email and
yeah,
then you guys all
yeah,
emailed back and
exactly,
forth? Okay. Okay. So he was
exactly.
watching this
Yeah,
email thread between the two of you go back and forth.
yeah,
I mean, didn't
yeah.
Mark then assume? I mean, was it explicitly said in this email chain? I mean, if Joe Rogan's going to introduce you through email and he's saying, "Oh, here's a journalist, Rav Arora," and Joe Rogan is a podcaster, right? These are both public
Yeah.
things. Don't you? I mean, did Mark, was he led to believe in this email exchange that it would be that it would be kept private?
Yeah, I think so because I
Reread
asked him at
those
one
because
point.
I think you should publish them. I think maybe, if you look back at it, he might not have had an expectation of privacy on on that
Well, no. The
arranged
thing is,
debate.
I asked him. Yeah,
Oh,
I
you
asked
did?
him at one point. I was like, hey, can I release this,
And what did he say?
or can we have a podcast conversation, or any kind of public forum conversation? And he was like, no,
Oh, he
no,
said
not at all.
no. Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
yes, yeah. So that was that.
Uh,
So I wasn't going to violate his kind of basic ethics, even though he was being a
but we already
total
know his
fucking
stance.
idiot.
I mean, what's he got? What is he?
Yeah,
What is he afraid of? His stance is public. He has publicly been very pro-vaccine. I mean, he's
yeah,
been pushing it this whole time. Uh, he didn't even decline doing an interview with a journalist once that was over the internet because the journalist was not
yeah.
vaccinated.
Yeah, it was funny. You mentioned Mark, and I was just thinking about that actually a second ago. Yeah, yeah. Her name's I'm gonna get her last name wrong. Her name's Layla Hathpern, something like that.
Yeah,
She's big into crypto, big into online currencies. Really popular over the internet. And she actually published these screenshots only like last summer.
yeah.
I don't know why she did it then, but she did, and it was like, yeah, can you come on my show? And he was like, yeah, happy to. I'm paraphrasing here. And then she was like, oh, checking in, like, so when are we doing this? And then he was like, are you vaccinated? And then she was like, no. And then he's like, you're not going to promote the vaccine? And she was like, no, I'm not doing your show then.
Yeah, and
Like,
her show wasn't
what's
even
wrong with you?
about. They weren't going to even talk about COVID or the vaccine. They were going to talk about
Yeah,
crypto, right? That's what she wanted him on to talk about, a completely different subject.
yeah,
And it was an online interview, not even one where he'd have to come into a studio or anything like that. And he was like,
exactly.
not unless you're vaccinated. I mean, it's just the level. That's like View lady, like it's like he might as well have just joined the cast of The View at that point, I feel
Yeah.
like. Uh,
Yeah, I mean
just,
that proved without a doubt, because that was not about. I mean, even if he had said that about like an in studio interview, that would still be fucking stupid,
right.
because it's like, why would you?
But it would be a
You know, we
little
we
bit more
we yeah,
understandable. Like there's
it
some
would be a little
logic
bit more.
there.
This was really
Yeah, no logic.
just coming clean, just coming clean here that he was not interested in participating in channels that weren't explicit propaganda arms of Pfizer, Moderna, the FDA, the CDC. Like that, that's how I would interpret that. Right? Either I'm going to go to an outlet where they're going to tell you to get vaccinated and tell your kids to get vaccinated. Other outlets that aren't pushing propaganda, sorry, I'm not interested. Like, wow, like really
What
showing his
what do you
true
think's
colors there.
behind that? I'm curious. I mean, I don't know if you've looked into Mark and his company. What's his pharmaceutical company that he's got going on? He's got some like. I wonder if I can look this up.
I don't know
He's
the
got
name off the top of my head, but
Cost
he
Plus
has a lot
Drugs.
of,
Okay, so he's got this Cost Plus drug company that is supposed to offer medications at really low prices, right? So I'm actually kind of like clicking on this link here. Um, Go to our
yeah. And
pharmacy.
from what I understand, doing a cursory look at those things, it actually seems good if that's as advertised, offering drugs at a
Well,
low
but
price.
right, but what I'm
But
wondering is if if the medications that he has, I mean, he's not making these medications. I mean, I think there was a plan, there's kind of a plan for him to open up a lab that actually does create medications, but I think a lot of these are just like actual drugs on the market, right? Or these, I'm not sure. Because I'm just curious if he has some sort of a deal with the big pharma companies. If it's like, well, like he doesn't want to ruin the business, it's just wondering about a conflict of interest there. If there's a conflict of
yeah,
interest,
that's a really good question. I haven't looked into that, but I wonder, like, with his companies, if he has direct ties, like Pfizer, Moderna, like, because that was an issue. There are pharmacies and hospitals and
right?
clinics that they're supposed to promote the vaccine, right? Because they're an establishment medical institution or organization. If he's part of something like that, then that explains at least one thing, right? If he has a
Right.
clinic or some kind of company that's supposed to promote the vaccine and he's going against that, that's bad for business if that's true.
It looks like his drugs are all generic, but there could be still some sort of like generics still have to be made by somebody. And a lot of times I think these pharmaceutical companies also make the generics. If their
Yeah.
patents have expired, I think they might still make them. So if that's the
Yeah.
case, there might be a relationship there that he didn't want to piss off, right? And so he
Yeah.
was like, go it's
Possible.
the vaccine, vaccine, vaccine. It's all about the vaccine.
Yeah.
Maybe.
To,
I mean,
to,
it's
to
just
close,
something to look into. Maybe.
yeah. No, totally. Yeah. So to close the loop on Mark, so Joe mentioned me and the whole conversation. Then people are asking me left, right, and center, like, what's going on? Like, what is this thing about Mark that Joe's talking about? Because he was kind of vague about it. I was like, okay, now I got to explain this thing. So then I posted the clip, and then I posted an explanation of what happened there. And then Mark fired back, and we were exchanging kind of big essay responses back and forth, and it turned into a viral,
On
fairly
Twitter or
heated.
where?
Yeah, on Twitter.
Okay.
Yeah, did you see it at the time? We went. You must have seen it.
I mean,
We went back
I
and forth.
probably. I mean, I don't know. It's been a while. So
Yeah,
much information in and out.
yeah. We were
Lots of
going
stuff on
back and
Twitter.
forth. Yeah, but he was basically saying, he's like, why haven't insurance companies like increased their rates for vaccinated people if there are cases, if there are such high cases of vaccine injuries, or why aren't sports teams not hiring or signing players who are vaccinated? And it's just like all these like left field arguments trying to prove his point, when it's like well, duh, like most players in elite sports leagues were vaccinated, right? Soccer players, basketball players. It just makes no sense to not sign players if they're vaccinated, especially because it's not the case that every player who's been vaccinated, every young male or female, is just dropping dead because of the vax. It's a percentage.
Right.
Now what percentage that is? I mean, the percentage could be as high as like 2% in terms of subclinical myocarditis, which we're still waiting on FDA mandated studies, by the way, from Moderna and Pfizer to look at subclinical myocarditis, as in, myocarditis is a clinical diagnosis, but there are a lot of cases where there are elevated cardiac biomarkers, but it doesn't meet the threshold of myocarditis. But if left untreated, or if somebody has some subclinical symptoms and is not treated or recognized, it could progress to myocarditis. We don't know the long-term implications of it. And so there were a couple of studies, one in Thailand. It was a very small study, but they looked at, I think you actually talked about this on your show a while ago, but it was something like 1.5 to 2% of young adolescents from the Pfizer vaccine, I believe, which has lower myocarditis than Moderna.
Yeah.
1.5 to 2% had evidence of subclinical or clinical myocarditis. So if that's a generalizable finding, that is actually like nearing the level of catastrophic. If that finding is actually can be applied to a large number of people, to the broader population, because that means that a lot of young males and older males and older women, it's not just young boys, it's anyone can get it. That means that there are potentially a lot of people walking around right now who suffered from this but didn't know they suffered from myocarditis. They didn't go to the doctor. I know someone like this as well, who I wrote about, who was at one of these publications, by the way, who are engaged in sort of suppression of this topic, vaccine injuries, and he had this experience, and he never saw a cardiologist, and he probably had some subclinical myocarditis, which he felt like went away. But I've been telling him, like, go to a cardiologist, man, because the way you described like your experience after the second Pfizer shot of feeling like you were about to die and just your chest beating out of control, like exploding out of your heart, that kind of experience that many individuals have had after myocarditis, this kind of acute cardiac symptoms. The implications of that we still don't know. And for some reason, these studies that FDA mandated Moderna and Pfizer to do were due like end of 2022. In one case, they got extended to mid 2023. I believe that was the Moderna one. Yet the findings have still not been released. And it's like the FDA can very easily pass emergency regulations to bypass sort of traditional regulatory methods for the COVID vaccine, right? Operation Warp Speed under the Trump administration, right? Quickly passing the vax and not doing like a rigorous comprehensive analysis because it's an emergency. Yet here are these studies. I would argue this is in some ways a greater emergency to younger people to find out the truth about subclinical myocarditis. And yet, for whatever reason, Moderna and Pfizer have not really been pushed in the way that they should have been by the FDA to complete these studies and to hand in the results, which were due now over a year in some cases.
Yeah, it's going to take, I think, years and years before we get, unfortunately, the like true magnitude of, for one, the vaccine injuries. I don't think we're going to see. I worry about the young kids that were vaccinated. What happens when they hit puberty? I worry about the young men who are vaccinated. What happens when they get into their 40s and 50s, when heart attacks are more prevalent for men? I wonder if we're going to just see higher rates because there was some undetected damage that happened, from the vaccine. And then, of course, like, will they at that time attribute it to the vaccine, or will they say, well, it was just, the diets have changed and kids are eating more sugar or something like that, right? They won't.
Climate change.
Yeah,
Climate
right.
change.
Climate
It's
change.
temperature
It was
horizon.
all about climate change.
Or
Yeah.
there was an article I remember reading. It was Business Insider, and I wrote about it at the time. It was like rise in heart conditions in young people. Doctors blame herbal supplements, and I was like reading. I was like, what? And it was like ashwagandha, which is a great supplement for anxiety, by the way, and like fish oil, and like a bunch of these supplements, which obviously you should use judiciously and carefully. But it's like, really, like, we're like, they're blaming like ancient plant medicines and like fish oil for like, but not talking about like COVID mRNA vaccines, which have a very clear
Right.
connection to myocarditis, especially when I remember reading that article and like looking at some of those herbal supplements that they were citing, and the doctors that they were interviewing were citing like very limited like case reports, like someone had like overdosed on fish oil, some freaking loon just took a bunch of fish oil or something, or some herbal supplement, and he had like some acute cardiac symptoms. So it's like making something out of nothing. Like, yeah, like anything in the excess can cause issues, but like this one thing that we know causes issues is somehow politically incorrect and taboo to talk about, and that's just been a great failure of the media over the past couple of years. And it's beneficial for us because you and I get to make a living. I mean, in another universe, I think you and I, could be, columnists at the New York Times, or maybe
Right.
you could have been a CNN anchor. Like, if there was, imagine like a free, open, media network that would allow dissent. You could be, hitting, sky high ratings on CNN or Fox News, or maybe I could be at the New York Times or Washington Post. But those institutions have just embarrassed themselves with all the cancel culture and woke ideology and failure to hold big pharma and the government accountable. And so that's why you have, the Kim Iverson show and the Illusion of Consensus and Russell Brand and Joe
Right.
Rogan. It's because of all these failures. So I think that's an important point as well, because the media is frequently like, why are people listening to Joe Rogan? Why are people focusing on
Right.
podcasts?
Right.
Why is this why is there this do your own research phenomenon? Well, it's like, because you guys can't do the fucking research. That's
Right.
why.
Yeah.
You guys
Because
are
you guys failed.
irresponsible and incapable of
Yeah.
doing the proper research and looking at these issues. So that's why there's been a big shift in media.
Have you been able to have you been trying to get published at all by any of these outlets? And have you had more success now that kind of COVID has calmed down? I know you have your Substack, Illusion
Yeah.
Consensus, but yeah, I mean, have you attempted, and are they like, well, okay,
Yeah.
now we will?
Not. I have tried, not to
Okay.
much success, but yeah, I have tried. I mean, keep in mind, getting published anywhere is difficult as it is. So it's not even. It's like for me, when I was writing about race and identity politics, it's I mean, 60% of the things I would send would get published, 40% wouldn't. So there's just like a natural issue. Like, editors have limited budgets, limited time,
Sure.
limited bandwidth, right? But yeah, I'm trying to think. There've been a couple of places that have been, like Epic Times has republished a bunch of stuff. There's a place called Brownstone Institute, Daily Skeptic.
Hmm.
I can't think of any major other ones off the top of my head right now, but I am going to be potentially signing something with Daily Wire for them to like republish or co-publish our stuff. Their editorial team is very interested in the work we're doing.
I'm kind of surprised by that. I have to admit, I'm a little surprised by that. Only because Ben
Are you?
Shapiro, well, I don't know if he's still involved with Daily Wire. I don't know how much like actual, I don't know if he,
Right.
it seems like the last exchange that was done between, what's his name, and the Daily Wire, it was Steven Crowder,
Steven
I think.
Crowder.
Yeah, when there was that, Ben didn't seem to have much power or involvement in any of that. So I don't know how involved he is at all
Yeah.
anymore with the Daily Wire. But, Ben
Yeah.
was one of those right-wing outlets that sure would have absolutely loved you when you're talking about, when you're a brown man talking about race, talking against the left
Yeah.
on racism and that narrative. But COVID, he pushed that vaccine. He pushed that stuff.
Yeah.
He was big on I think mandates even. I don't know if he was like truly pushing mandates, but he was certainly pushing the vaccine.
Yeah, no, he wasn't pushing mandates. He was pushing the vaccine and promoting it, and that made him. kind of isolated at the Daily Wire because I think Michael Knowles and Matt Walsh and Andrew Klavan had a different line on that. So he was taking a different line and taking a lot of heat from his audience because, I mean, whether you like this or not, whatever one thinks, like there still was and is big ideological differences. Like you saw a lot of conservatives, a lot of people who voted for Trump, were more skeptical of the vaccine, even though ironically Trump was promoting the vaccine, right? That's why you would see those videos of him like talking about the vaccine and like, I approve the vaccine in record time. It's a great vaccine. You should take it. Everyone should. Like people are like, what the fuck? Shut the fuck up. There's this like great irony of that. But Ben took a lot of heat for that, and I think he was wrong and irresponsible at the start in promoting the vax. I think there was some tweet, if I'm not mistaken, where it was like, just get the shot, you idiots, or something like that.
Right.
And
right.
then, but to his credit, though, he did change his position, I believe, in 2022. He's interviewed Jay Bhattacharya, Marty McCary, he had Robert Malone on at some point, and he changed his mind based on this one European Parliament hearing where they were talking about how they never tested the vaccine for transmission.
Right.
Even though, to be honest, that's actually more revealing of a little bit of ignorance because the initial studies, if you're like listening to like Alex
super ignorant on it because all the data was coming out of Israel, of all places in the world. Israel was having all the data that, many of us were paying attention to their data because they did the whole doses for, the trade where they got the doses first. So they were the first country to vaccinate practically everybody. And we were able to watch, and they were starting, he's got friends and family in Israel. He's the biggest, he's all super pro-Israel. So, why wasn't he paying attention? They're like, we're on our third dose now. It didn't stop the spread. We're on our fourth dose now. It didn't stop the spread. I mean, talk about like a blind spot, total ignorance. But I will give him, Daily Wire also does have Candace Owens and Ben Shapiro very much at odds right now on the Israel-Palestine issue. So maybe there is, maybe it is an outlet that does allow more, various viewpoints. You don't have to be in line with whatever it is that they think.
Yeah, and I've been on Ben's show once, like last year when we launched a Substack, and we talked about vaccine injuries and myocarditis openly. So, I think that's the difference. I think whether you love Ben Shapiro or hate Ben Shapiro, whatever, but there's a difference between some people who are holding on for the life of them, people like Mark Cuban, people writing at the New York Times, people at CNN, to a degree, some people like Sam Harris. Irrespective of left or right, they're holding on to some of these narratives quite rigidly, right? And they won't change their mind. Whereas you have some people who have honestly changed their mind. People like Ben Shapiro, people like Megyn Kelly, Vivek Ramaswamy. I did a podcast with Brett Weinstein where we went over this. Vivek, Megyn, Elon talked about feeling like he was nearly hospitalized after the third dose, and his cousin got myocarditis. Megyn Kelly tested positive for an autoimmune issue. Which is pretty vague. I'm not sure what's happened since then with her. She hasn't really talked about it, but her doctor was saying it very much could be linked to the vaccine. Vivek Ramaswamy also saying his mind shifted on this and he's became more skeptical of the COVID vaccine. So you had people changing their mind, right? You had people, Glenn Greenwald's also talked about some of this as well. Like him and Megyn and a few other people, were vaccinated and boosted, but they were skeptical about their children getting vaccinated and fighting for it. And so I credit people like Megyn, who have changed their mind on this pretty radically, I think.
But it's easy to change your mind now. At this point, it's it's not courageous. And look, like Megyn Kelly, I don't agree with her on a lot of things, but she is to me an inspiration, somebody that I really do admire. Yeah. I like her.
You guys got to talk.
What's that?
You got to get on her show or something.
Yeah, and I would love to have her on my show. She is somebody that I genuinely, when I would watch, and I wasn't a big Fox News watcher at all, because I tended at that time to be more on the left. But I still just really I really admired her and everything how she was on air, and I really like Megyn Kelly a lot. I don't agree with her on a lot of things, but I do agree with her on a lot of other things, and I like her. So, but I do think
on the right, much more open-minded on the right than other people, much less zealous and attached to views. She's very open-minded, and she'll have many people left and right, whereas other people are more dogmatic about their right-wing views, which I don't think she is.
Yeah, and I definitely appreciate that. And there's a lot of people on the left who are similar as that as well, who are more open and willing to have
Yeah,
conversations
yeah.
and talk. And it's kind of a rare breed these days, which is really sad and unfortunate that it is a rare breed. And I do appreciate that about Ben Shapiro. I don't agree with Ben on pretty much anything. I think I don't think I've ever agreed with Ben on anything, not much. But I do
You guys would
appreciate.
agree on the woke ideology, the trans issue.
Maybe I just don't
Yeah,
think it's as big of an
yeah.
issue as they may. I mean, I do think it's a pervasive problem that needs to be addressed. I just don't think that voters. One of my biggest contentions when I was on Glenn Beck's show, when I went to the Blaze, and then they had me on a few of the other shows while I was out there, and I flat out said on one of the shows, this is not an issue voters are going to vote on. This is not going to be. You think it is. You're obsessed with it. You talk about it all the time. I get it, but I'm telling you, voters are not going to, this is not it. And when we look
What about
now
the
at
election in Virginia, though? What about the election in Virginia that one
the gen,
time?
I think the Youngkin, that one wasn't about woke ideology. That was about locking down schools and forcing parents to mask their children and not allowing their kids to go to schools. And the parents were like, what the hell am I going to do? I've got to go to work and my kid can't go to class. And, these educators are saying they know better for my kids. I don't think it was about woke ideology. I think it was about lockdowns, COVID,
Right.
being told as parents, just that being told you're not the decision maker for your own children.
Yeah.
I don't think it was specific, but the rest of it, I just really was like, and I still believe it, especially now that polls have come out and we know what voters care about. And woke ideology is not in their top 10. It just isn't. The border is number one for people. Economics, the economy is number two. These are for conservative voters. They're caring about foreign policy before they get to woke ideology. So, it's not something,
Interesting.
I think it's something that's very salacious. It's like scandalous to put in the media. People want to talk about it all the time.
Right.
But again, I don't walk out my front door and think, oh my gosh, I'm going to be accosted by like a trans activist. Like, they're going to
Right.
get me. They're going to groom my
Yeah. I
kids.
mean,
Like,
it is a growing issue, though. Obviously, I mean, just
yeah,
anecdotally.
it's
I mean,
something to be
I
concerned
should not
about.
really, yeah,
Sure.
yeah,
If you're a
yeah,
parent,
yeah. You see
especially,
more.
and you're sending your kid off to school, you want to make sure that they're learning math and reading and not, we're going to, I wouldn't want, I mean, like I said, I grew up in conservative Idaho where most of the people around me were highly religious, but they didn't teach us religion in schools. I mean, that was kept out. But because it's not religion, and many parents wanted religion to be taught in school. There was debates about evolution
Yeah.
versus, right, creationism and that being taught. But so there was always that push, but people would say, no, we just want kids to learn the basics and we want to keep your religion out of it. We don't want them to learn whatever the religion is. It's easy when it's religion. But when it's woke ideology, which is essentially a religion, but it's not labeled a religion, it's been harder to control. And that's, I think, that needs to be like nailed down. It's ideology shouldn't be taught in schools. Like leave that to parents and leave that to communities and leave that kids will learn from each other, their friends, their relationships with people outside of class. So, but because they haven't been able to like encapsulate it into this is religion, they have had a harder
Yeah.
time controlling it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. And I do think, though, that more and more in elections here in Canada and the US and the UK, I think you're going to see more and more, and you already are, parents who are going to be voting more and more, thinking about, this trans issue, the woke ideology in schools. Like I'm hearing about it a lot, anecdotally. One of my sister's friends was talking about how her parents are like, if they ever once mention like LGBTQIA plus, like tell us right away. We want to know what they're teaching you, what's going on.
Right.
And a lot of people who were more on the liberal progressive side are maybe not be evangelical Christians, but they're concerned about
Sure.
These things being taught. And I think their voting patterns are going to change as a result. If there's like a more of a centrist or more sensible conservative candidate, I think you're going to see more and more people vote on that issue. I think.
Yeah, but I think at the local level, I think they'll go for it at the school board level or at their local level with their.
Yeah. That's
I
what
mean,
I mean mostly.
It's really a school board issue. Like just vote in a different school board if you don't like what your kids are being taught in school. And parents make a stink all the time and things get changed. But we're now seeing kind of a reversal of like the book banning, for example, in Florida. Now Republican lawmakers in Florida are actually writing new legislation that makes it more difficult for parents to try to just unilaterally get certain books banned because they realize it's gone too far. So I think it's like a pendulum. Certainly parents are concerned. I just don't think it's like the topic of the time. I think again, it's like race. To me, it's the same. It's exactly the same as when the liberals were like, racism, racism, racism. And this is the
Right.
number one concern. And I'm sitting there like, I do not care. When I walk out my front door, I'm not thinking racism
Yeah.
is the problem that I'm facing. I don't think that my sister or
Yeah.
any of my friends that have children are thinking, oh, and I send my kids to school, they're going to be like,
Yeah.
they're going to be accosted by a trans person who's like doing reading hour. Like,
Right.
it's not their thought, right? That's not what
Yeah.
their number one thought is. It's a concern.
Yeah.
You don't want it to happen. I don't want to have a racist, say something to me, but it's not
Right.
like a primary, as much as the left was making it like this is the number one issue that
Yeah.
everybody
Yeah.
cares about.
Yeah.
We're running out of time. I'm like, I know
Sure.
you've got to go. We didn't even get
It's all good.
into, which I wanted to get into, your latest piece, this whistleblower, how the government funded misleading scientific studies to demonize MDMA. I know you're kind of shifting now. COVID's kind of now, luckily, thank God, it's kind of, being pushed to the side. And now we're moving on to like other topics and other issues. This is very interesting. Your article's very interesting. It is at illusionconsensus.com for people who want to read it. I will put the link down below to this article because I think it's interesting. But and hopefully we could have you back maybe to talk about that. And that was kind of what we initially were saying
Sure.
we were going to talk about, and then we just got off track and talked about a bunch of other stuff. So,
No, I know it's all good.
but
Yeah.
Rab, tell everybody, where can they hear your podcast? You've got this podcast with Dr. Jay Bhattacharya.
Yeah.
When do you do this podcast, and where can people listen to it?
Yeah. It's all pre-recorded. It's not live, but we release podcasts 2 to 3 times a week,
Oh, wow.
and it's on Illusion of Consensus Substack, illusionconsensus.com. And the way we monetize is paid subscribers, and those people get exclusive content and podcasts early and Q&As with Jay and I. We're just going deeper and deeper into big pharma, free speech. Jay's still doing a lot of COVID-centric podcasts. We have a great podcast up on lab leak theory, and this guy, Alex Washburn, who wrote a paper last year that took a lot of heat about hypothesizing and pointing towards the virus being manipulated. And I don't know if you've covered it on the show, but the new FOIA documents basically confirm, you might be a good guest on your show, by the way, basically confirm what his paper was saying at the time, that EcoHealth Alliance had requested for these specific, they're called reagents that were used to like manipulate the virus. And there's
Right.
like more and more damning evidence now that the virus was manipulated, and this guy was right. So Jay and him did a fantastic 2-hour podcast. I just hosted a 3-hour podcast with my friend, Dr. Tracy Beth Hogue, a great researcher on myocarditis, and this other individual, who's a former physics professor, Denis Rancourt in Canada, who had this big paper that was going viral on 17 million deaths being caused by the COVID vaccines. And I moderated that discussion for 3 hours, which was quite
Wow.
quite chaotic, quite illuminating as well. So we're doing more and more of that content, but for me, I'm going more in the direction of in the way I think the authorities and the medical establishment were wrong and simplistic and often dangerous and harmful when dealing with COVID and with mRNA vaccines. It's really the same story in some essential way when it comes to depression, ADHD. Like, there's shortages now of ADHD medications because we're medicating every kid that says they can't focus and doesn't like math class, just popping them pills like Halloween candy. People who say they're depressed, here we go, here's an antidepressant, and
Yeah.
no discussion about side effects or holistically, like looking at your childhood traumas and your emotions and your relationships, and if you're meditating and working out and whatever. There's all these issues that the more and more I realize, as I was saying earlier, the authorities are wrong, the establishment is wrong about a lot of these things, and they're favoring things that benefit them financially and are kind of easy to sell and easy to kind of propagandize to the public. And thankfully, I was telling Russell Brand this a few days ago on his show, I think the tide is turning. I think more and more people, just like working out at one point was crazy. It was just like, oh, that's early
Right.
1900s. It was kind of a weird idea. Now everyone's working out. Everyone's in their yoga pants, going to the gym and, listening to Joe Rogan, and now it's like taking supplements and listening to Andrew Huberman talk about taking your magnesium and vitamin D and ashwagandha and cordyceps mushrooms. And now psychedelics are like becoming a more big thing to like explore childhood trauma, to explore your emotions and why you have certain behaviors, and more people taking interest in therapy and mindfulness meditation. I think the pendulum's really shifting. I think COVID did a lot to shift it the other way. And the authorities, if they want to win back any form of credibility, whether it's media or pharmaceutical or political or public health oriented, they're going to have to start telling the truth and having some kind of reckoning. Otherwise, we're going to further move down this kind of infinite diversification of media, where it's like all these different platforms that everyone listens to, rather than centralized authority and centralized power.
Yeah. Rav Arora, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate the time.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. Keep up on your great show. You're an
Thank you.
inspiration.
Thank you. All right, guys, that is it for tonight's show. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate you watching. We will be back tomorrow at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern with another great show. Thank you so much for watching. Have a good one. Bye-bye.